Alrighty, folks. So I'm going to go ahead and redo something slightly here. So I've spent the last couple of weeks spending a lot of time, actually probably the last month or two, reviewing this whole issue about Trump and MAGA and the Supreme Court. And essentially what I figured out what is going on, but what I need to do is I need to cut it down. I have done a pretty decent analysis. Jesus, speaking of the devil, done a pretty decent analysis of what's going on with Trump as a person, his business history, personal history, political history, MAGA as an entity, and the way they operate, their modus operandi, if you want to say that, how they're basically dividing and isolating themselves from the center and right, the center and left of the American political spectrum, how the left has actually played into their operation that they have going on, which is basically to simplify everything to some irrational level, eliminate, if not ignore, and reject the intelligence of the American people. So I would say basically the people with IQs over 90, okay, just reject them and focus on what I would call the torches and pitchforks mentality of we have a social or physical challenge coming from X. We need to focus on X is the problem. Let's all spend our time and energy worrying about X and forget all about everything else. So basically, without going into too much detail here, they've simplified the socio-political issues of the United States, if not the world, down to issues which technically, in a sense, are borderline inarguable. To be honest, there's enough science in what they're saying that it does carry weight. It's one of those things where even if it's not 100% true all the time, it's true enough, often enough to be an issue that can't be just dismissed and refuted unless you want to dismiss and refute it, which is exactly the issue that we're dealing with here. Is we have the conservative right wing ignoring and dismissing concerns of minorities in this country, and minorities in this country are doing the same thing. The whole intellectual argument is to dismiss and ignore the concerns of people who are not intellectuals, who are intellectuals even, and that creates a rift. And the MAGA crowd has both created and exploited a rift between the moderates and liberals in this country and the conservatives and the MAGA crowd in this country. And it's to a degree working in their favor, largely because it is a concern that shouldn't be ignored. And I think that the fundamental mistakes that the liberals and lefts and center of the country have done is to just try to intellectualize, like mansplaining things to the conservative right. The conservative right has had it. The conservative right is not buying into it. They're all leaping on the conservative bandwagon, and they're all rushing headlong into in a battle. God be with me. I raise my sword in the name of Christ. If Christ decides that I win, then victory shall be ours. Just as if it was the Crusades in the 15th century. It's really a opportunity for the conservative wing of this country to engage in a crusade in the 21st century. And I think that moderates and the liberals are missing this, thinking, oh, just like in the 60s, the 70s, the 40s, the 1850s, we've consistently rolled back everything that happened that the conservatives wanted to have, that was just, too conservative, it was wrong. And I think they're missing a big issue here, is that we've gone through the civil rights movement. We've gone through moderation, we've gone through liberalism, and now we're at this point where arguably, I'm not saying that this is true or not true, I'm just saying people need to think about this. They need to understand this point. It's not that it's true or not true that's the issue. It's that they've fastened on it. They've attached their wagons to it. They've got their battle gear on and are ready to go to war, okay? It doesn't matter whether it's true or not true. The point is that they want to believe it is. And we need to respect that religious zealotry and realize there is a real threat to the flanks of the moderate and left wing of this country. And we can't ignore it by just focusing on our own concerns. The meritocracy is being attacked from behind, in a sense. They've found a weak spot in the argument and they're attacking from that position. So the economic issue, I think Trump honestly has a lot of baggage in that regard. But the main thing is that they believe that Trump is the guardian of the American economics, our economy. True or not, despite his personal and professional catastrophe of a life, they believe that Trump is the guardian of the American economy. Okay, so again, it's not arguable. You're not going to argue with these people. You're not going to rationalize with these people. You're not going to have any kind of intellectual discussion with these people. They have an idea in mind and they are fixated on it. And every issue that blue states have with crime, crime, basically, I would say crime first, last, and foremost is one thing, but we haven't, I think that blue states have not done enough, while at the same time, I think at the same time, they could never do enough, okay? That the major advantage that MAGA has in its anti-intellectualism is the ability to change the argument at its convenience. Whatever strong points you talk about in the meritocracy, MAGA will say, well, you know, we have too many people going to college, okay? Whatever you talk about how conservative dogma has, you know, crime, there's crime in white-dominated societies, there's a lot of sexual assaults in white-dominated societies. They'll just turn to topic and say, well, what about all the black on black crime? So it's whatever issue that you want to talk about in rebuttal, okay, or talk about an issue that even they bring up, they will always avoid having an intellectual discussion on a topic when it's convenient for them, but then they will argue that liberals and moderates are avoiding the intellectual issues that they want to bring up. So it's like this, it's stupidity having found a way to advance and promote its own interest, despite the fact that it's stupid. And you have to admit, almost every other species on this planet has done the same thing, okay? The fact that people are intelligent is not going to impress people who are not impressed by intelligence, okay? What they tend to focus on is the unintelligent in the group of intelligent people. Just as Hitler tried to make all the problems of Germany about the Jews, all the problems of Europe and most of the problems of the world about Jews and Hebrew religion and about the Jewish culture, the American conservative in this country is trying to make all the problems of the United States about minorities. So everything that has been done in terms of science has given them ammunition for their argument. And it doesn't matter whether it's pro white supremacy or anti-white supremacy. If it's anti-white supremacy, they will make the irrational argument that it's because of the manipulation of the liberal intellectual elite and how they've skewed data and promoted multiculturalism. And you see where that's going. It's going to gangs taking over, the United States. Either Latin gangs or black gangs. They never talk about white gangs, they never talk about white crime. It's always about minority crime, minority issues, never about white issues. They do not even want to think about white on white crime or white fraud or white sexual abuse or white violence. All those things, if at the very most, if they touch on them at all, it will be to say that this particular person has a problem or this particular family has. Remember the shooter in Georgia that just happened last week? All that you will hear about the shooter in Georgia is how he was picked on because he was gay, or he was the family was disarranged. Now it's a single parent family because they've gotten divorced. And one of the traditional things they always like to talk about blacks that commit crimes is, the father's not there, or the mother is deranged, or see, that's what happens when you give kids strange names, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of that individual stuff is coming out, but it's all being kind of covered over by the facts, the facts that blacks are responsible for more crime per capita in terms of the black population than whites are. So 25% or more of blacks have been incarcerated. Okay, how many white people have been incarcerated out of all the white people? So you can talk about percentages, you can talk about numbers, and you can talk about historical racism, you can talk about all kinds of issues, but the main issue is the summary. The summary is this great perception among whites that minorities are the problem with this country. Okay, and you realize we know MAGA well now, by now, after at least 8 years of MAGA, you're not going to get through to them because they are in a zone of white supremacy. White people started this country. White people made this country great. White people are the reason that this country is even where it is. And yes, we're not surprised that a lot of minorities and a lot of foreigners want to come to the United States because we've done such a great job of making this country. Whether that's true or not, and have to admit to a large degree it is true, okay, the main issue is they're focused and fixated and in unison about core issues like we need to get President Trump in the White House so he can fix what's wrong with this country. Regardless of Trump's past history as president, regardless of all the lies that he's told on the campaign trail and about his past and all the lies about the pasts of other, Trump can lie his fat round ass off for years, for 5, 8, 7, 12, whatever years, and people will believe him. Some people will believe him. And that is the issue that we are dealing with right now. So to skip to the summary, the real point is I think we have a situation where we have a solid 40% of the United States that's going to vote for Trump regardless. In 2024, in November of 2024, we have a solid 40% of the country that's going to vote for Trump regardless of anything else. Okay, they're on him. We have a solid 40% in this country that's going to vote against Trump and is even ecstatic at this point that we now have someone who's at least able to string a sentence together, at least able to pay attention to what's going on in the room, as the Democratic candidate for president. I think the whole thing with Biden and Kamala Harris was completely predictable. At some point it was going to happen. However, it does leave the argument that a lot of GOP members have made that it should have happened before, that he's not really competent to be president now, and that to some degree there's a conspiracy going on that Kamala Harris is a candidate while she's not the president. If anything, it should have gone to another step and she should have actually invoked the 25th Amendment and had him removed from office. And that is now being used to attack Harris. And I think the big issue is that, yes, it was upsetting to Trump, but mainly he's been able to pivot all of the issues onto Kamala Harris because she was part of the Biden administration. Even though she wasn't the shot caller in the Biden administration, she was certainly part of it. But to say that Kamala Harris is distinct from Joe Biden is stretching the limits of reality. Obviously, as part of the Biden administration, certainly as a vice president, she had to be involved to some level. But what I think is going beyond the pale is to blame it on her as much as Biden. Obviously, that's like saying that what happened under the Trump administration was as much Mike Pence's fault as it was to Trump. But Trump doesn't work like that. His mind doesn't follow from his conclusion to the logical conclusion of what he's saying. He tends to stop at his conclusion, his favorable conclusion, and ignore all the other stuff that falls out from it. It's like the Remain in Mexico program, having a deal with the Mexicans. I could go on and on and on and on. These people will simply stop thinking at a perspective that is favorable for Trump. And that is the big issue that we're dealing with here. We have to be careful to separate what we want to believe from what actually makes sense. And we don't really want to do the same thing that the MAGA people are doing, because the MAGA people will just say, oh, you're just doing the same thing. You're just saying everything was great from Biden. Biden did everything great, and Kamala Harris is going to do everything great, and Trump sucked. So it can't be just about personalities. We have to stick to the issues, not the people. If you talk about Biden versus Trump, they'll just talk about Trump versus Biden. Okay? And the insanity of MAGA will always carry them way past where things make sense. And you end up spending all your time and energy, if you fall into this trap, of arguing with them about the details. The details are not the issue in this election. And I want to say that 5 more times, but I've already spoken about this for 17 minutes. I got to make this point. This is the important point of this election. It is not Trump. It is not Biden. It is not Harris. It is what the Supreme Court did by declaring that the president has immunity for official acts. That is the issue of this election. That essentially gave the President of the United States total immunity for anything that they do as president that they can cast as an official act. Total, absolute immunity. Not for the law. He's just, by removing the law from the equation, the Supreme Court has cast the president as the ultimate totalitarian ruler of the entire world, of the entire planet, as long as they can convince Congress that what they did was an official act. Then Congress will always be divided about impeaching the president. So you can forget about that, especially if the GOP wins the majority in both houses in 2024, which is very much a possibility. As a matter of fact, it's likely to happen that we may have both a GOP/MAGA president, whether it's Trump or not, okay, whether it's 2024 or 2028 or whatever, okay, and also a GOP/MAGA Congress, that both the Senate and the House of Representatives are in their hands, along with the presidency, along with the Supreme Court. And then you were talking about all 3 branches of government are in MAGA hands. If not MAGA hands, then certainly GOP hands. That is the critical issue that we have to worry about going forward. Once that decision was issued by the Supreme Court, all bets are off, all the chains are broken. The president and the Congress are free to do whatever the F and H they want to do. Period. They are no longer bound by the law. One will cover the other. Okay? And so even if you can, somehow get a case, a review of some law or some act of the government, it still would have to come through that filter of, was it an official act? Well, then it was perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. How are you going to be a subordinate of one of these two and not carry out an order by the president or by Congress? We're seeing right now, Steve Bannon is in jail right now for a whole 4 months due to time served. He's already been under investigation, and the same thing with all these other MAGA people. They've already been in jail, so they're going to serve for a minuscule amount of time beyond the 4 years that Biden has been in office after Trump left. They are looking at a pardon if a GOP president is elected. They're looking at a pardon even if Harris wins, because the Congress can write them some kind of legislative exemption. You don't know. We don't know what they're going to do. The whole point is we can't predict what they're going to do if given the power to say that it was an official act. And aside from the whole idea of where and how the Supreme Court found that idea to be a good idea that they could do and then do it. 3 steps. Okay, not just one, but 3 steps. Okay, why they thought that made even the slightest sense to say that, okay, is not the issue now. The issue is, how are we going to deal with this world like that? A world in which the President of the United States is unfettered when he has a solid political majority. He's on his last term. And God knows they might even change the term limits. They might even have this quasi constitutional convention. They may not even care what the Constitution says. Okay? At this point, the Constitution is irrelevant. The law is irrelevant. The Supreme Court is the only thing that matters, if that. And the Supreme Court is not going to remove the President of the United States. That's entirely up to Congress. And if Congress is run, if both houses are run by the GOP, you can forget any concept of impeachment and removal from office. It's just not going to happen. Any other president that the GOP brings in after him, J.D. Vance or whatever, would do the exact same thing that Trump is going to do. Okay? Just forget it. It's not going to happen. So the only time in this country, in this particular next 2 months, that the center and the right and the left together have to get this under control at all, period, is to vote against Trump in this election. It has to be a no debate, no argument, no issue. It has to be done. The only way that this country will be anywhere like it was going past this election is if Trump loses. Okay? It has to happen. And I would say on top of that, we need to have at least enough votes to keep the Senate. You see how much trouble these people can cause just by having a House and the Supreme Court. The last thing that you want to do is hand them total control of the United States government. It would just be a hopeless endeavor after that. You would basically be free at that point to consider the United States government the same as the Nazi government in 1939. All the Jews and all the other unmentionables that they wanted, load them up on the trains, ship them off to Auschwitz. You'd be exactly the same. Whether or not they get killed there or gassed there or whatever is a different question. But certainly they've been talking about for a while, doing the exact same thing that Reagan did in California in the 50s. Just send the police through the entire state and sweep up every Latino and ship them to Mexico. That's exactly what Reagan did when he was governor. Okay, and they didn't ship out just the people who were here on temporary work permits. They didn't ship out just the people who were here illegally and entered the country illegally. They shipped every Latino in California they could find, whether they were citizens or not. They just completely ignored their constitutional rights as American citizens, loaded them on trains, and shipped them right to Mexico. This actually happened in the United States. And people, if you think it won't happen again, you are in a world of hurt. If this man or these people get control of the United States government again, they have already taken steps in motion to do the same thing on day one of Trump's presidency. Whether the question is, who are they going to not ship? Not the question of whether they're going to ship somebody. They're going to start going through this country and shipping people out of this country. Now, I don't really think that discussions about whether that's an effective policy or a good policy or bad policy are even relevant here. It's not relevant to people who have been deported from the United States. It's not relevant to people who are in a deportation camp. It's not relevant to people who are being threatened with deportation, whether or not the policy will work or not. The point is, your opinion is no longer relevant to the issue. You either leave or face retribution by not just the government of the United States, but also people who decide to become vigilantes and enforce this new decision or a new attitude, okay? And I don't necessarily want to say that this is going to lead to a race war, because I don't know how many people would actually fight about it. I think that's one of the simple things. But I do think that there are a couple of other factors that would make this a race war, not just the tens of millions of people who would be affected by this, okay? And also the people who are going to have their businesses fold, the people who are going to have their wealth disappear if this happens. Because frankly, a lot of people in this country are not just sitting around here collecting unemployment checks or Social Security checks. It's not that simple. Okay, there are a lot of people who are actually here doing good, constructive work in this country that are going to be risking being deported, and lose their wealth, their job, their home, everything. Okay, and there's no small damage that they're looking at doing here, but they're so sure that the fundamental problem is the minorities in this country that they're willing to make the sacrifice to get all the minorities out of the country and then recover, okay? And that is the main issue. So don't underestimate this at all. Forget all the side issues. Forget all the distractions. Don't worry about Taylor Swift and cat ladies. Don't worry about the Latin gangs in Ohio. Don't worry about the affirmative action argument and the diversity, DEI argument, whatever. Forget all of those issues. Those are only relevant to people in the United States. If you're not in the United States, if you cannot participate in the functions of the United States as a civilization, your opinion on these issues is totally irrelevant. You have one and just one concern going forward from now on out. Make sure you do not vote for Trump. Everything else is completely secondary. Don't vote for that guy. Your entire life will be in jeopardy if you vote for him.